Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our session on WSIS+20, a follow-up about milestones leading us to momentum. This session is co-organized by the Internet Society UK United Kingdom chapter, the Internet Society Switzerland chapter, the ISOC Belgrade Serbia chapter, and Germany chapter. Thanks to all who participate in co-organizing this. I'll say a few. My name is Desiree Miloshevic Evans, and I'll be co-moderating this session together with Olivier Crépin-Leblond, who will be taking on questions online for people joining us online. We'll have one remote speaker and more speakers in the room that can fit the stage. And so just to orientate us for the session, what we're trying to achieve today. A couple of words about our session. Our session will explore the opportunities, but also some challenges and primarily the priorities for aligning institutional roles across the WSIS processes and strengthening coordination. We hope to offer, and if possible, agree after our speakers have made initial remarks and through the interactive exchange, agree on some milestones that will help with the implementation roadmap that is currently being built. And we are really lucky to be able to hear from exceptional set of experts from around the world and different stakeholders, governments, private sector, technical community, civil society, and academia. And they will help us clarify and outline priorities by firstly reflecting of what's been achieved throughout this +20 review and the process, and then projecting the picture forward. What are the first steps? Where do we start in this huge task that we have ahead of us? So, as I said, I think we suggest that we start from a global, broader perspective about these institutional roles as to how the WSIS outcome document and the Global Digital Compact can be aligned in practice. So I'll start with introducing our first speaker, Paul Gaskell. He's Deputy Director for Digital Trade, Internet Governance and Digital Standards with the DSIT, which is the Department of Innovation for Science, Innovation and Technology with the UK government. Paul, welcome. And first asking you a question, if you could, I would say that WSIS+20 has reaffirmed that we have these long-standing commitments through which we're all working together, but the implementation needs clear milestones and where to start. What are the most important measurable milestones from the UK government point of view for the next 12 months so that we could demonstrate that the WSIS+20 implementation is going to be implemented? And the question is on. Yes, and please take a mic.
Thank you. Just to give a couple of very short reflections before I answer your question directly. So
certainly,
we would view the outcome of the WSIS+20 review as actually a really important success, particularly given other possible outcomes that we might have foreseen as a possibility at an earlier date. And there's a couple of points I'd pick out. I thought in terms of the process, we were really pleased about not all UN processes run smoothly. We thought that the genuine multi-stakeholder process for the review by the co-facilitators, for example, the informal multi-stakeholder sounding board process, we thought it ran really well. So we're pleased with the process. And as you alluded to, the outcome, given this is the Internet Society, the focus on, as you mentioned, the Permanent Mandate for Internet Governance Forum, the reaffirmation of the 2005 Tunis principles, and the clear statement that the IGF is the primary forum for internet government dialogue. Those are really good results. So, as I say, they were not automatic that we were going to achieve those. So I think we should bear that in mind. In terms of, you said that in terms of forward measurables, so obviously here we are this week at the WSIS Forum. What have we got coming up? We've got the plenipotentiary, we think, in Doha, but that seems to be an interesting question at the moment. We've got the IGF in Kenya. We've got the GDC review. There's a few things that I would pull out. I think one of the real milestones is how successful are we in genuinely increasing wider stakeholder participation, particularly from G77 countries, particularly by small and medium-sized enterprises, including particularly increased diversity, younger people, women, etc. And I think one measure of that, I think we're extremely fortunate that the next IGF will be in Kenya, and I think that's an excellent opportunity to demonstrate and to see greater G77 participation. So I've lots more to say, but I don't want to extend my answer any further. But
yeah, I'll stop you there.
That's the one milestone I pick out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to Matthew Shears, who's a board member of Internet Society chapter. Matthew is joining us online. Since you have been following these processes, you have a diverse experience serving on the ICANN board, but also on the chapter board in the UK, but you followed most of the governance processes for a long time. I would like to know perhaps your opinion on how coherent implementation would take place between the global digital compact that we now have, the global AI dialogue, and that we have the WSIS process, that we have the WSIS framework with action lines, that we have a really good IGF ecosystem. What are your initial thoughts? How to align all these processes for the benefit of moving forward?
Thanks, Desiree. I seem rather large on the screen. It's nice to see everybody, and thank you very much for letting me speak on this issue. We have great opportunity, and we also have some troubling past behaviors that we could easily slip into in this process going forward. WSIS and +20 and the GEC have much in common. They overlap in parts. They differ in other parts. But the way I would look at it is there is significant opportunity, and it's very much up to stakeholders to grasp that opportunity rather than to fall back into our somewhat isolated tracks, which is an easy and all too often common way of approaching these kinds of policy issues. So let me talk about the opportunity, but then we also talk about the possibilities of fragmentation and other challenges. So the opportunity is significant. If you go back and look at the GDC, you look at Article 68, there's an explicit ask, an explicit expectation, I would say, that the IGF and the WSIS will be core components of implementing the GDC. And this is something we can't take lightly or for granted. We need to actually work to make this happen. It's a great opportunity, but it can be, as I said, easily thwarted if we think about these things in the ways we have in the past. The challenge that you pose to me is what are the opportunities, or I should say, what are the challenges of fragmentation and duplication? The biggest problem is, I think it's really that we continue to see these as processes that are not linked, that these are processes that will go on in their own ways. They will not be sufficiently aligned at the senior level, and that the opportunities for the IGF and its multi-stakeholder processes will not be realized. I think what we have to come out of the GDC seeing is that the multi-stakeholder process is something now that has credibility in the eyes of many. It's achieved a level of standing in the international policy circles related to the internet and development. And so these are things that we really need to look at. How do we take this forward? The problem that we have is really how do we convince and how do we work with all these myriad of players now who are involved in the GDC? And the limited time frame that we have between now 2027 and then 2030. So I think this is one of the ways of doing this is actually saying, okay, how does the WSIS, how does the IGF make the most of this opportunity? And one of the things that we might want to reflect upon is how do we encourage the IGFs in the future to pick up on the many themes that require multi-stakeholder engagement that have been outlined in the GDC. There are issue sets in there that have not typically been addressed by the IGF in the past, but that makes it all the more of an opportunity. And it also makes it a space where the multi-stakeholder model can truly bring its expertise to bear, where in many cases this has not been the case to date. So I think it's a great opportunity. The challenges are, as you've noted in the agenda, is that the duplication and fragmentation. But I think this is an opportunity to make the most of. It's not a time when we need to revert or back into our traditional modes of operating, but rather to see this as a opportunity to take forward the multi-stakeholder model with the new credibility that it has and the new awareness of it. Part of the WSIS process has been recognized in the GDC.
Thank
So
you.
let me stop there.
Matthew, it's very good. So we started with the expectations and what being delivered, and that we are all surprised with a good outcome. And now you mentioned challenges and the way forward to that everyone needs to pull together. That is a great opportunity. So you're seeing this milestone as an opportunity. It's a call for action. I'm going to turn next to Markus Kummer, who is an expert in IGF and probably needs no introduction. He was the father of the IGF ecosystem, serving the Secretariat for the first 5 years and setting the values of what the IGF system perhaps looks like today, and followed its evolvement by being the chair of the MAG, and so on. Markus, in your view, what should be let's say in the next 5 years, if you could project that long, first to reflect upon the evolution and then perhaps still say it later or now, what should be the key successes for the IGF ecosystem to evolve?
Well, thank you for the introduction, and it's great. Gives me great pleasure to be here, and it's actually very easy to build on what Paul has said and what Matthew has said, and Paul has outlined very articulate way the achievements of the WSIS+20 review, and I would add to that also the recognition of the WSIS+20 review that the IGF is no longer a standalone annual meeting, but is at the center of a vibrant ecosystem with intersessional work, and the recognition also of the national and regional initiatives and all the intersessional work from the policy networks, best practice forums, and also the dynamic coalition. I think that is a big recognition of all the work that has been done. Now, looking forward, and again, I share Matthew's concern about the potential of fragmentation of the different processes. And I see the IGF very much as the glue holding the processes together. And that brings us also back to the question, what is internet governance? So some people try to say it's different from digital governance. But to be frank, we don't have a definition of digital governance, but we do have a definition of internet governance. And we have a definition that is at a fairly high level of abstraction. But what it means in practice is we deal with the physical infrastructure, the cables, the nuts and bolts, the logical infrastructures, the names and addresses, and then the use and abuse of the internet. And that AI was not an issue when we came up with the definition, but AI is included in that definition. So let's not make a dichotomy between the various processes, but it all falls under the broad heading of internet governance. Internet governance is not just about small important technical issues such as names and numbers, but it's much broader, the definition. That was agreed by the UN member states and confirmed by the General Assembly in many resolutions. So let's stick to that. And then going forward, I think, again, the big achievement of WSIS+20 is it's a permanent mandate. Before, we always had to struggle for a renewal of the mandate. So there was always what we need to do to make sure the mandate gets renewed. So that pressure is off. So that means the IGF can be much freer and also, I would hope, bolder in what it's doing. But it also maybe needs consolidation. I referred to the many intersessional processes, but they are built on voluntary collaboration of a bunch of volunteers, but they don't have legal personality. And that is also a challenge because I'm working very closely with some of the NRIs. For them, it's difficult then to enter in a contractual arrangement because legally speaking, they don't exist. Many of them, they have to bank on to an existing entity, often an internet society chapter, but also sometimes it's a government agency, all that, but precisely because they see the same challenge. The same goes for the dynamic coalitions. It's a bunch of volunteers doing voluntary work, but if they want to embark on a more ambitious project where maybe money is involved, they need to enter into contractual arrangements then it gets very challenging. So this is something I think we need to look at internally, how to consolidate these processes. There's no easy solution, and that can be, it's also different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but these are complex issues. But this is one of the challenge ahead. But my take on that would be consolidation of what we have and make it more stable going the way forward. It's always building on the bottom-up voluntary nature of the IGF and make sure there's no top-down taking control of the IGF ecosystem. That's my short take on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus, for these concrete ideas on consolidation with all the care that is needed to go forward, and reminding us of this permanent mandate and brings additional challenge to really keep the bottom-up nature of the IGF ecosystem. That brings me to our next speaker from civil society perspective. It's a pleasure to introduce Valeria Betancourt from Association for Progressive Communications. You're the governance lead there. From the civil society point of view, what are the priorities or major accountability gaps that you see in order that we need to overcome to get to some milestone or further processes?
Thank you so much, Desiree, and the organizers of the session to take part of this very relevant conversation. Obviously, there are clear wins stemming out of the WSIS+20 review. Some have mentioned already the permanent mandate for the IGF, the integrated approach to the implementation of the WSIS GDC and others, but there are also very significant regrets, like the gender integration into the process. And the one that I want to focus on is the lack of serious commitment with the funding situation, the fundraising, funding the achievement of the WSIS vision and the implementation of the action lines in tandem with the Global Digital Compact. So that is from the point of view of the EPC and other civil society actors, one of the main gaps and challenges that we have ahead. Obviously, as part of the WSIS+20 review process, a crucial step forward is the creation of the interagency task force on financing. And we have obviously a lot of expectations that the establishment of this multi-stakeholder consulting group will not only strengthen the multi-stakeholder engagement and contribution to the task force, but also help us to make the connections of this issue with the several other challenges that we have at the structural level, including the fact that meaningful connectivity is not yet there for a big portion of the population. In our view, it is a crucial moment to develop a very granular understanding of what has not worked in the past 20 years and why are there still, as I mentioned, a third of the world not yet connected. And if we look at meaningful connectivity, that obviously the amount of people that are not still benefiting from digital technologies increases. So although we are making progress in various fronts, including initiatives that are precisely led by civil society organizations and the technical community, that driving force around some financing advocacy initiatives. And despite the fact that there is some progress in terms of, for instance, incentivizing conversations around the need to finance local networks to bridge the digital gap, the progress that has been made is quite small and very small steps, and so not only slow but also very tiny steps. So this is important to bring the commitments of the GDC and the WSIS in relation to these issues again and put them on the table very clearly and strongly. So in our view, just very quickly, the task force, the milestone that we want to see, obviously this ANGIS task force on financing opens a very unique opportunity to make creative options for the future. But in order to do that, it has to be informed by the past. So the task force, in our view, should not approach the financing of the WSIS and the GDC from the point of view of the development agencies, but rather from the point of view of the recipients. And this includes not only developing countries, but also the small actors, the small implementers. The task force could perhaps map what are the approaches that have been working in other fields and how to extrapolate those to the implementation of the WSIS and the GDC. It could perhaps look at the gaps in the existing financial landscape. It could identify what are the most effective mechanisms for the funding to flow, because there is the assumption that the funds are there, the financing is there and is not there. And there is also the challenge that is related to this one is that there is a lack of understanding of the huge role that civil society plays in the implementation of the WSIS and the GDC, particularly in contexts in which the state is weak. But for the civil society to be able to meaningfully engage with implementation, funding has to be there and is simply not there. So let me leave it at this point for now, and then I can perhaps elaborate a bit more on how we see steps moving forward in this regard.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights. What's important for civil society? So you took us across the whole spectrum, not just the recipients of the benefits and countries and developing nations, but also civil society as a stakeholder. And you continue to work on this as a milestone. I'm going to jump the queue and maybe go to Charles Noir, who is the Vice President with CIRA. He's Vice President of Investment Policy and Advocacy. So my question to you would be, beyond government, civil society, what would be the role for the technical community to contribute and have an active role in the next phase to speed up implementation? And feel free to mention milestones as well. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having CIRA and for me being here. This is great. I would like to start off by saying that huge agreement with a lot of what's been said already. And I think that that represents the fact that there is alignment, at least in concept, right across the stakeholder groups for the most part. One thing that I would add, and that we were very pleased to see in the final document, was the recognition of the technical community as a unique stakeholder, and not just a tri-party. And that was something through the technical coalition, community coalition on multi-stakeholderism, which is 45 technical operators that have come together, certainly argued for. We were very pleased, and CIRA was very pleased to see that, what we thought progress making it into the document in the end. I think in terms of, I agree with what's been said, we need to really think about duplication. We really need to think about how many organizations are involved now, the degree of topics that we're spanning. And as technical community, or as a technical operator, CIRA is looking most forward to doing what we've always done, which is to bring practical expertise into the policy discussion, right? And so we're working with, for example, our government very closely and other governments to provide that, what we can argue whether there's neutral advice here or not, but we like to see ourselves as fairly neutral operators that can get into the policy conversation early enough so that when the outcomes are produced, we can implement some of that. And so in terms of speeding it up or meeting the SDGs and everything that we're trying to do, broad strokes throughout the WSIS and the political momentum that we gained with the GDC, as a technical operator, we really see ourselves at CIRA as being able to implement at the infrastructure layer the necessary conditions, the technologies that deliver on hopefully all of what we're trying to achieve, but certainly some of what we're trying to achieve. And so we see ourselves as supporting all stakeholders in that process by being able to bring that expertise to the table, highlighting when proposals might not make a lot of sense, and really also recognizing the incredible structure that we've already developed in this multi-stakeholder model, whereby we have technical organizations like ICANN, we have ISOC on another field. We have a lot of players that understand particular areas very well, and we look forward to representing that in the policy discussion so that, again, we can implement at a technical level eventually the outcomes of the policy decisions that are moving. I would add just on that, one of the big milestones for me would be, I would really like to see us really concentrate on meaningful outcomes from the IGF.
Thank you for those insights as well. Our next discussant and speaker is Dr. Jimson. Olufuye, I could give you my seat, or if you have a mic, and sit here. He comes from Nigeria. He's very active. He's a CEO of a private company, and you have a vast experience in all these processes, translating commitments into national strategies. So from your point of view, bringing the perspective of a private sector company in a developing world, what do you think would be possibly the most urgent national implementation of the WSIS and GDC commitments that need to be translated?
Thank you very much, Desiree, and greetings, everyone. I would like to say, first and foremost, +1 to all that been said, particularly what Markus mentioned regard to the IGF has been the central point. Developing countries do not have so much resources to be moving from here and there. Well, IGF has been that rallying point for us to really discuss this issue. Specifically, a developing country will be looking forward to full implementation of the WSIS+20 outcome document. Full implementation. And number one, with regard to the multi-stakeholder approach, the document recognized the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines, recognize power asymmetric, and based on that, those are better resourced, be able to bring on board other stakeholders. So that message needs to be passed across even to all developing countries as well. In terms of regulation, when they are coming up with regulation, they should not just sit down in their offices and then come up with something for the economy. No, they should bring all the stakeholders together, and they can use things like the sandboxes approach so that we can get smart regulation to address many sectoral issues, maybe in finance, maybe in telecom, maybe in health or agriculture application. And by so doing, there'll be a sense of ownership. And then we can actually achieve what we are targeting, the Sustainable Development Goal. I think the whole essence of this is so that we can still achieve the Sustainable Development Goal. Then also, we need that we should share the success stories that we have. We have a number of success stories. For example, last year, Nigeria launched its national payment stack, and that brought in all payments, fintech, traditional banks, all microfinance, all payment infrastructure under one single gateway, and you can achieve instant payment across all sectors, and that boosts inclusivity. So we can actually help project that so that other developing countries, because in Africa, about 54 countries need to get that success story across. Then I think Valeria mentioned the issue of a blended finance, financial mechanism. I believe maybe by the time ITU has been mandated to come up with the task force, mandated to come up with the best financial mechanism, I think they can really help developing countries to fine-tune their kind of financial processes, blended finance, so that they can easily implement projects that will be result-oriented, not the one that could maybe hang somewhere. Then lastly, the outcome document also mentioned the issue of statistics. We normally just get coverage 91%, 95%, but about meaningful access. So we need the National Statistical Organization to be empowered so they can be assisted, they can be provided with support, not just funding, but even technical support to get those data, even household consumption of these devices, of this good broadband access, and not just the fiber cable laid, how many laid, but meaningful engagement in the process. So that is what I'll just say for now. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning good data in order to work on milestones. Last but not discussant is Dr. Yik Chan, and at the table there she's a project lead on AI with the university, the United Nations University in Macao. And your field is really what you are working on is, since you're a project on AI, I will ask you a question. How can AI governance be more integrated into the WSIS framework without creating parallel tracks or competing governance structures?
Thank you.
And welcome.
Yes, thank you, Desiree. Yeah, I think as we know that, I think I fully agree with other speakers' point of view. I think we all that the GDC created two mechanisms, and the Global AI Dialogue and the Independent Science Panel. But at the same time, they also create the audit of the Office for Digital and Emerging Technology to advance the inclusive, right-based, multi-stakeholder digital collaboration. And also, there's already have a UN agent, so it's UN Interagency Working Group on Artificial Intelligence, which is coordinated by the ITU and the UNESCO. So there's some new mechanism created by the GDC, but there's also existing mechanism within the UN itself.
And the last 2 days during the AI Global Dialogue, we actually heard the creation of new initiative. Probably you heard like AI Governance for Humanity Lab and AI for Good Global Commission. The AI for Good Global Commission is quite an ambitious one. And the UN AI Resource Hub and also the Global Network of Center for Exchange and Collaboration and AI Capacity Building and extras. So we see during these 2 days, last 3 days, we see the new initiative emerged through the Global AI Dialogue. So I think the question for us is quite interesting. The question is what the synergies are with the GDC and the existing and the new structure evolving from the GDC, and what is the role of the IGF. And first of all, before I talk about the role of the IGF, I would like to give you some initial conclusion of the Global AI Dialogue. So there's several conclusions from the Global AI Dialogue. The first one, they say that the dialogue is not to replace the existing mechanism, but is to connect all the existing mechanism, and force the mutual learning and strengthen the complementarities. And the second thing that they stated very explicitly is that the focus will not focus on like abstract principle commitment, but it shift from the abstract to operational government structures. And the third one is they said inclusive participation and interoperability and multi-stakeholderism are crucial for the effective global governance and also the multilateral collaborations. So in the end, what they want from us is they want we prepared, concrete, named, supported, and result-oriented commitment, not like a principle for the second UN Global AI Dialogue, which is in May 2027 in New York. So this is what we are going to do within this, is like 6 months, less than 1 year. So in relation to that, I think what the IGF or the WICS could do, from my experience I've been involved at IGF for 16 years. So I think one thing I would really want to urge is the IGF can work more closely with the audit or the UN Interagency Working Group to monitor the implementation of GDC, just like Matthew said. The monetary duties or the responsibilities, the mandate of the IGF. So how can we function and our role to monitor the implementation? Actually, we have to work with the audit and the UN Interagency Working Group. I think secondly is more importantly, from my experience by involving with the IGF over more than 16 years, I think there's a problem with the, how can I say, we need to consolidate IGF resource, just like Markus mentioned, and more importantly, to have a more effective mechanism, including the effective governance structure and leadership, and including fundings. How can we more effective to connect and reach out to other AI governance agents?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very important.
I'm going to put you on hold before I come back to you. Thank you for sharing all these very important new initiatives, parallel initiatives, and we're trying to consolidate. So we heard consolidation, we have new initiatives. Are they going to work in parallel or just create new spaces? So I would just, before I ask Olivier, is there any questions or comments online?
Thank you, Desiree. Yeah, there's no comment online, but I was just going to remind you we've also got ISOC that has a paper, a non-paper that is ready. So maybe, I don't know when you want to call to say 30 seconds words on this.
We will open it for comments from the floor. Yes, the Internet Society has a paper, how everyone should work together. I could invite someone from the Internet Society, perhaps Carl, to take it as a rowing mic.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the panelists for this excellent section. Always great to see a lot of ISOC faces up there. As mentioned, I did want to make a sort of shameless plug for a non-paper that we recently published that is also reflecting, I think, a lot of what was mentioned on the panel today, which is not that much of a surprise because it's built on input from our community to large part. One of the elements that I wanted to also speak about, which we talk about in this non-paper, is the need to improve our efforts to implement the action lines. We talk a lot about the opportunities to improve the IGF, etc. But in our view, the IGF is working quite well. There's opportunities to improve the IGF, or leverage it further. But the part of the WSIS process that we see in grave need of further work is really the implementation of the action lines. And one of the recommendations that we have in this non-paper is to really focus our efforts on developing good roadmaps, because that is, in our view, an important tool to foster both sort of focus of the conversations, make sure that we have clear targets, but I think importantly also a bit of accountability for these commitments, that unless we have these roadmaps, unless we have a shared understanding of kind of what needs to be done on a year-to-year basis almost, there's a risk that we simply don't progress as much as we should. We welcome people to have a look at this non-paper, and we would love to have further feedback on it and see how it can be further improved. But thank you very much for this session, and looking forward to the further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this community survey, and maybe you can put a link to the non-paper in the chat. It would be useful.
And there's a late question that's arrived.
There's a late question. Maybe we could just first see before we open the floor for questions. Please go ahead.
Okay, so it's from Perry and Esfandiari, and well, there's two questions. I know there is, it's the same. If the emphasis is shifting from abstract principles to operational governance, what mechanisms will ensure that implementation remains accountable to the values those principles were intended to protect, rather than simply becoming an exercise in institutional coordination?
Thank you for reading out Pari's question. And Pari, thank you for joining us and having that question. I'm going to hold that question on to just collect a few more, as we have only a few minutes before the end of the session. There's one at the back.
Flying mic.
Thank you, Desiree. Wouter van der Borg, working in the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Standards, etc. Having heard a lot of what has been said, that I think we're talking about two different topics. One is the day of the week IGF, and the other is all the intersectional work that is going on. And how does that align? The other side is what is happening on the outside, and what Matthew was saying, and I think also Paul said on the panel, how is the outside coming in and become part of what our output is going to be? So does that take another form of organization of the IGF to make sure that all aligns? So does the MAG need to have a different sort of mandate, or do we need, what Wolfgang Kleinwacht always said, have liaisons from the MAG to other organizations? And they are there because they're representing, between brackets, already these sort of communities. So let me stop there, but I think that the reorganization.
Thank you for pointing that out. I will let someone answer that question. I think we are not focusing only on IGF, and we also have somebody from the Secretariat, and there's a report from the expert group meeting pointing out to these weaknesses you've just mentioned. So I'll see if anyone wants to first go with Wout's question, perhaps Markus or Charles, in terms of this IGF looking forward and connecting to the broader UN agency work, how that consolidation or milestone will happen.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, that's obviously the IGF is not in a vacuum and needs to connect, but we do have a mechanism in place that is the UNGIS, the UN Interagency Coordination, and the IGF Secretariat is involved there, and there will be a new multi-stakeholder addition to the UNGIS, and that is obviously important for the IGF to connect to the other processes out there. Now, how this will be done, it's really up to the IGF community to define, and the MAG has already started its process and is looking at these issues, and I'm confident that the current MAG, full of dynamism, will find pragmatic solutions on how best to achieve this. But it is work in progress, and it's part of the consolidation.
I hope, thank you, Markus, for those thoughts. I hope that is clear. Before we ask any speakers to perhaps reflect of what's been said on the closing part, if anyone would like to also address the question from Pari Esfander about account, I welcome. Yes, Valerie, sounds like you like to.
For sure, I think two things at least. I think very pragmatic application of the multi-stakeholder model is needed, in terms of acknowledging that it is not serving the interests of all the stakeholders similarly. So I think a critical approach to understand what are the real dynamics of power that are permeating an effective and more meaningful application of the multi-stakeholder model is needed. That's one thing that will obviously increase accountability. I concur completely with ISO, and I think the non-paper is going to be very valuable because the roadmaps for implementation of national levels, obviously that will come with a layer of accountability. But let me also insist on the issue that I want to stress, which is the urgent need for financial ecosystems at all levels that are viable, that are innovative, demand-driven initiatives drawing on public, private, but also community-based sources. And this has a very important element of public accountability as well as defining the public interest. So when I'm talking about the financing ecosystem, I'm not only referring to the possibility to throw money to specific sectors, but actually enabling all the necessary conditions in a very intentional manner to build a more sustainable ecosystem that could ensure the availability of investment, public sector support, directed private sector financing, funding for startups, alongside financing mechanisms at all levels that operate within and beyond the public sector and that allow resources to flow between the different spheres. So there is a very important element of accountability that comes to that, and that is essential. It's a non-negotiable in the implementation of the WSIS action lines and the GDC objectives without financial mechanisms and this financial environment is a non-negotiable and is not feasible without it.
Thank you, Valerie. Yes. I'm going to ask also speakers if they have any final thoughts, starting with Jimson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to simply say that all of us here need to consider ourselves as WSIS champions. So, and as champions, we should go ahead and be the evangelists, ensuring that the agreed principles are implemented, especially the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guideline. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimson, for being brief. And Dr. Yik Chan.
Yeah, I think the IGF is the only multi-stakeholder mechanism in the UN system, so we need to utilize our resource, consolidate effectively to hold the AI governance process accountable. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Charles?
Certainly. Just a quick note on the last piece. I think part of what we do in the multi-stakeholder governance system is we have an opportunity to keep each other. Co-accountability is important, right? And we have to be brave enough to bring those issues to the table when we meet in forums like this. So I would say let's exercise what works in this governance system, and that part of that is co-accountability.
Thank you for this thought, Paul.
A couple of quick thoughts and a really interesting conversation. Fully agree about the WSIS action lines and the roadmap being a bit of WSIS that is underappreciated, so totally agree with that point. I think now that it's got a permanent mandate, I would like to see the IGF have a more focused, practical, concrete outcomes, and I think we should begin with that in Kenya. I'd like to see that. On funding, obviously, let's wait for the outcome of the task force, but there is a recognition clearly the Secretariat is underpowered, and that would be beneficial. But I would also say, and this is my personal view, multi-stakeholder organisation funding should also be multi-stakeholder. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to ask Matthew online if he wishes to say anything in closing.
Yeah, thanks, Desiree. Just a couple of quick thoughts. I think the opportunity for the IGF is significant, but also it's going to take a lot of work. Institutional coordination challenge, which I think Pari was talking about in her question, which can be something that can be overwhelming in terms of it's sitting within the UN system now. So I think that's something that has to be worked at. And I think also there's an opportunity for the IGF to extol its multi-stakeholder credentials within the UN system at the same time. But that means that we cannot lose sight of the local importance, the national IGFs, and the inputs that they have. So I think if you balance all those pieces, there's a lot of work but opportunity ahead for the IGF. So I don't envy those who are leading the IGF, but I think at the same time, it's a fantastic opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Going back to the IGF being the glue, and Markus.
Nothing really to add, but just to build on what Matthew said, there's a huge opportunity for the IGF to fill this space and to really connect the dots in the various initiatives.
finally, I hope you found this session informative and insightful as I did. And I hope that this is not the end of our discussion. We have chapters active in all our places and many coalitions of the technical community, civil society active. So I think we need to roll up our sleeves and help paint that implementation roadmap together. I would really like you to thank all our panelists and speakers and you for being the great participants.